I should have turned around the moment the fog swallowed the road, not when it started rolling in. Fog on the Oregon coast is normal. Everyone who lives there knows that. But this wasn't normal fog. This was the kind that erased the world around you like someone was slowly deleting it. 1 second the road was clear, the next second it was just gone. And that's exactly where this story begins. It was late October of 2023. I was driving south on Highway 101 after visiting my sister in Astoria, Oregon. She'd just had a baby, so I spent the weekend helping around the house, assembling furniture, cooking meals, that kind of thing. By Sunday night, I was exhausted, but I had work the next morning back in Newport. It was about a 3-hour drive, maybe a little longer depending on traffic. I left around 7:45 p.m. That was my first mistake. Anyone who knows the Oregon coast knows Highway 101 at night can feel isolating. Long stretches of forest, sharp turns, miles where you won't see another car. Add fog to that, and the road turns into something completely different. For the first hour, everything was fine. I had music playing quietly, my windows cracked open just enough to let the cool air in. The ocean was somewhere to my right, hidden behind cliffs and trees. Then somewhere past Tillamook, the fog started appearing. At first, it was just patches, thin streaks floating over the asphalt. But the farther south I drove, the thicker it got. Within maybe 10 minutes, my visibility dropped to barely 30 feet. I slowed down immediately. My headlights reflected off the fog so intensely that it almost looked like I was driving inside a glowing tunnel. No streetlights, no houses, just road. I considered pulling over somewhere, but there really aren't many safe places to stop along that stretch. So I kept driving. Slow, careful, focused. That's when I saw the first person. He was standing on the side of the road. At least, I think it was a man. It was hard to tell. All I could see was a tall figure standing just beyond the white line of the shoulder. He was facing the road, completely still. I instinctively slowed even more. My brain immediately started trying to rationalize it. Maybe his car broke down. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But the weird part was, there was no car, no hazard lights, no sign that anyone had pulled over recently. Just the figure. Standing there. As I got closer, my headlights finally illuminated him clearly. He was tall, really tall, probably 6'5" at least. He was wearing a long dark coat that reached almost to his knees. His hands were tucked in the pockets, and his head was tilted slightly downward, like he was staring at the ground. I drove past him slowly. As I passed, I glanced at him through my passenger window. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't look at my car, didn't even acknowledge that I existed. That alone was strange, but not terrifying, at least not yet. I kept driving. The fog got thicker, so thick that I could barely see the center line anymore. About 15 minutes passed, or at least I think it was 15 minutes. Time feels weird when you're driving through fog like that. Then suddenly, my headlights illuminated another person, standing on the side of the road, same position, same height, same coat. My stomach dropped instantly, because there was absolutely no way that was a coincidence. It was the same guy, same stance, same posture. Except this time, he was standing on the opposite side of the road. I remember actually laughing nervously when I saw him, not because it was funny, but because my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I hadn't passed any side roads, no intersections, no houses, just forest. And yet there he was again, standing there, waiting. As I drove past, his head slowly lifted, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. I can still remember his face, not because it was scary, but because it looked completely blank. No expression, no emotion, just eyes, watching me. The moment our eyes met, I felt this wave of unease wash over me, like the kind you feel when you realize someone has been watching you longer than you thought. I pressed harder on the gas, not speeding exactly, just enough to create distance. The fog ahead looked even worse now. My headlights were practically useless. At that point, I was doing maybe 35 miles per hour. Then something appeared in the middle of the road. A person. Standing directly in my lane. I slammed the brakes. My tires screeched against the wet asphalt and the car stopped maybe 10 feet from him. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. The figure stood there, motionless. This one was wearing a hood. The hood was pulled so far forward that I couldn't see his face. For several seconds, neither of us moved. I flashed my high beams. Once, twice, 3 times. "Hey," I shouted through the windshield. Nothing. He didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't step aside. He just stood there, blocking the road. I looked in my rearview mirror, trying to decide if I should reverse and turn around. That's when I saw someone behind my car, walking toward me. My entire body went cold. Another figure, tall, moving slowly through the fog, maybe 20 feet behind my car. I was trapped, someone in front, someone behind, and both of them were moving toward me. I threw the car into drive and swerved hard into the opposite lane. The guy in the road didn't even react as I sped past him. But the moment my car passed, something slammed into the back of my vehicle. Hard. The impact jerked the steering wheel out of my hands. For a split second, I thought another car had rear-ended me. I regained control and sped forward. My eyes immediately went to the rearview mirror. Nothing. No headlights. No car. No people. Just fog. I drove another 15 minutes before the fog finally started thinning. Streetlights appeared. Then houses. Then a small gas station. I pulled into the parking lot immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. I stepped out and walked around to the back of my car, and that's when my stomach dropped again. The rear bumper was crushed inward. A huge dent ran across the entire back of the car. But there was something strange about it. There was no paint transfer, no scratches, just a deep dent, like something incredibly heavy had slammed into it. I stood there staring at it for almost a full minute, trying to process what had happened. Eventually, I convinced myself that maybe I hit something while swerving. A guardrail, a post, something like that. That had to be it. It was the only explanation. But there's one detail I didn't notice until later. When I got home, I checked my dashcam footage. At first, everything looked normal. The fog, the road, the first figure standing on the shoulder, then the second, then the one blocking the road. But when my car swerved past him, the footage captured something I didn't see that night. The figure didn't move, didn't step away, didn't turn his head. He just stood there, completely still. And when my car passed him, the camera caught a second figure standing directly behind him. Another tall silhouette, perfectly motionless, which means when I drove between them, there were two people standing in the road, not one. And the worst part, neither of them were there when my car got hit. Even now, I still drive that highway sometimes. But if fog starts rolling in, I turn around immediately because I never want to find out what actually hit my car that night. Before I get into the next story, I want to ask you something. If you were driving alone on a road like that and suddenly saw someone standing in the fog, completely motionless, would you stop to help them? Or would you keep driving? Let me know what you would honestly do in the comments. I read a lot of them, and some of your stories are honestly just as creepy as the ones I share here. And if you enjoy true horror stories like these, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. I post new scary stories every day. All right, let's get into the next one. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the fog made everything. Not normal quiet, the kind of quiet that feels wrong, like the world is holding its breath. That's the best way I can describe what it felt like the night I got lost in the fog outside my hometown. And before anyone asks, no, I wasn't drunk, high, or hallucinating. I know exactly what I saw out there. I just don't know what it was. This happened in March of 2024 during my spring break from college. I'm originally from a small town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where nothing really changes. Same houses, same gas stations, same people working the same jobs they've had for the last 20 years. It's not a bad place to grow up, but when you come back from college, it feels painfully slow. Most of my friends had different spring break schedules that year, so while I was home for the week, almost everyone else was still at school. That meant I had a lot of time on my hands. Too much time, honestly. I decided I'd use the week to get back into running. Back in high school, I ran cross country and track, and there was this trail I used to run almost every day after practice. It cut through a section of forest just outside town and looped back around to the main road. The whole loop was just over 3 miles. I'd probably run that trail 100 times, which is why what happened that night still bothers me, because I knew that path like the back of my hand. The day it happened was a Tuesday. Around 5 in the evening, I decided to go for a run. The sun was starting to dip toward the trees, but there was still plenty of daylight left. At least, there should have been. When I stepped outside, the first thing I noticed was the fog. It wasn't just a light mist. It was thick, so thick that the houses across the street looked blurry. That should have been my first warning, but I figured it would probably clear up once I got moving. Besides, I'd run that trail in worse conditions before. So I stretched for a minute, started my watch, and headed down the road. The first quarter mile was through my neighborhood. Normal stuff. Driveways, mailboxes, a couple of people walking their dogs. Once I reached the trailhead, though, the fog became noticeably thicker. The trees blocked what little sunlight was left, turning the trail into this dim gray tunnel. I could still see the path clearly enough, though, at least 20 feet ahead. So I kept running. The ground was soft dirt and pine needles, which felt a lot better on my knees than pavement. For the first mile, everything was completely normal. My breathing settled into a rhythm. My legs felt good. And the woods were quiet, just like they always were. Actually, quieter than usual. Normally, you'd hear birds or insects. But that evening, there was nothing. No sounds at all. Just my footsteps hitting the trail. Around the 1.5 mile mark, I checked my watch, still on a decent pace. The loop should have brought me back toward the road in another 10 minutes or so. That's when the fog started getting worse. I mean, noticeably worse. The kind where the trail ahead of you slowly fades until it's just gray. I slowed my pace a little, not because I was scared, just because I didn't want to trip on a root or something. About 10 minutes later, I glanced at my watch again. 2.7 miles. That didn't make sense. By that point, I should have been coming up on the hill that leads back out to the road. Instead, I was still surrounded by trees. Same narrow trail, same fog, no hill. I figured my watch GPS was probably glitching. The forest canopy could mess with signals sometimes. So I kept going. Another couple minutes passed, 3.1 miles. At that point, I stopped running because the loop was only 3 miles, which meant I should have been back in my neighborhood already. Instead, I was still in the woods. I stood there catching my breath and trying to think. Maybe I missed the turn somehow, but that didn't make sense. There were no turns on that trail. It was literally one path, straight through the forest, and I definitely hadn't left it. I decided the smartest thing to do was turn around and run back the way I came. Even if my watch was wrong, the trailhead couldn't be more than a mile behind me. So I turned around and started jogging back. The fog had gotten even thicker now, so thick that I could barely see 15 feet ahead. That's when I heard the sound. At first, it was faint, so faint I thought I imagined it. It sounded like humming, low, slow, almost like someone was holding a single note. I stopped running. The sound stopped too. I waited a few seconds. Nothing. So I started jogging again, and the humming started again. Same tone, same slow, wavering sound. I stopped again. Silence. My chest started tightening a little, because the sound definitely hadn't come from me, and it definitely hadn't come from the wind. I started running again, faster this time. The humming came back, louder now, and closer. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. The sound was moving with me, matching my pace. Every time I sped up, it sped up. Every time I slowed down, it slowed down. I looked over my shoulder. Nothing, just fog. But the humming was definitely behind me, and getting closer. I started running as fast as I could. Branches brushed against my arms as I sprinted down the trail. My lungs were burning. My legs felt like they were about to give out, but the humming kept following me, closer, louder, like someone was right behind me. After what felt like forever, the trees finally started thinning. A faint glow appeared ahead through the fog. The road. I burst out of the forest and nearly collapsed onto the pavement. My chest was heaving. I bent over with my hands on my knees, trying not to throw up. For a few seconds, I just stood there catching my breath. Then I turned around, and that's when I saw it, standing in the middle of the trail entrance. A shape. Tall. Much taller than me. At least 7 feet, maybe more. It was completely black, like a silhouette, and it was swaying slightly from side to side. The humming had stopped, but I could feel it watching me. Not just standing there, watching. I couldn't see a face. I couldn't see arms. Just this long, dark shape. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then it tilted slightly, almost like it was leaning toward me. That was enough. I turned and ran down the road toward my house without looking back. The entire way home, I felt like something was following me. But when I finally reached my driveway and looked behind me, the road was empty. I told my parents about what happened later that night. My dad thinks I got turned around and scared myself. My mom thinks it might have been someone in the woods trying to mess with me. Maybe, but there are two things I can't explain. First, when I checked my running app later that night, it said I had run 5.8 miles, which is impossible, because that trail loop is only 3 miles. Second, the humming sound, because a few days later, my neighbor told me something strange. He said that around the same time I was running that night, his dog had started howling nonstop toward the woods behind our neighborhood. And according to him, the dog only does that when it sees someone standing out there. Before we get into the final story, I'm curious about something. If you were running alone in the woods and heard a sound following you through thick fog, would you stop and try to figure out what it was? Or would you run like your life depended on it? Let me know what you would do in the comments. I read a lot of them, and some of you have shared stories that are honestly just as creepy as the ones in these videos. Also, if you're enjoying the video so far, take a second to hit the like button. It really helps the channel and tells YouTube that you want to see more scary stories like this. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss the next upload, because I post new true horror stories every day. All right, let's get into the final story. The fog on the water didn't bother me at first. If you've spent enough time around the Pacific Northwest coastline, you get used to it. Fog rolls in and out constantly, especially in the early morning. But there's a big difference between normal fog and the kind that makes you feel like something out there is watching you. This happened in September of 2019, and even now, years later, I still think about it whenever I see fog over the water, because whatever we heard out there that morning, it shouldn't have been possible. My friend Tyler and I had been planning a kayaking trip for almost a year. Both of us grew up near the Washington coast, and kayaking had always been something we did whenever we had the time. Neither of us were beginners. We knew the tides, we knew the currents, and we knew how quickly conditions could change out on the water. The place we decided to go was a massive coastal bay near the Olympic Peninsula. It was the kind of place people went for bird watching, fishing, and exploring tidal flats. On a clear day, it was beautiful. But the morning we chose to go out, the fog was already thick when we arrived. I remember looking out across the water and barely being able to see 50 feet ahead. Tyler shrugged it off. "Fog will burn off in an hour," he said. That's what usually happens. So we launched our kayaks around 7:30 a.m. At first, everything felt peaceful. The water was calm. The fog muffled every sound, making the entire bay feel strangely quiet. Even our paddles dipping into the water sounded softer somehow. We stayed close together as we paddled farther out. Maybe 20 minutes passed before we reached deeper water. That's when we heard the first sound: splashing. At first, I thought it was Tyler adjusting his paddle, but when I looked over at him, his paddle was resting across his kayak. He heard it too. We both stopped paddling. The sound happened again. Splash, pause, splash. It sounded like someone rowing a boat. Not paddling like us, rowing. If you've ever heard the difference, you know what I mean. Oars hitting water make a deeper, heavier sound. Tyler glanced into the fog. "Probably another boat," he said. That made sense. Fishing boats and small rowboats weren't uncommon out there. But there was something strange about it. We couldn't see anyone, and the splashing wasn't moving closer or farther away. It was just there. Off to our right, somewhere in the fog, maybe 100 feet away. Tyler called out, "Hello?" His voice carried strangely across the water. No response, but the rowing continued. Splash, pause, splash. Same rhythm, same distance. We started paddling again. At first, we kept our course the same, but after another 10 minutes, something about the whole situation started making me uncomfortable. Because the rowing hadn't changed. Same pace, same distance. It sounded exactly as far away as it had when we first heard it. I slowed my paddling. The rowing slowed too. Tyler noticed the same thing. We stopped paddling completely. The rowing stopped too. For a moment, the bay was completely silent. Then, splash, right where it had been before. My stomach tightened, because that meant whoever was rowing had stopped at the exact same time we did. Tyler spoke quietly. Okay, that's weird. We both stared into the fog, trying to see something, anything. Then suddenly, the fog shifted for just a second. Just enough for me to see a shape, a small wooden rowboat, maybe 50 feet away. There was someone sitting inside it. I could see their silhouette, but I couldn't see their face. Then the fog closed again. Just like that. The boat was gone. Did you see that? I asked. Tyler nodded slowly. Yeah. Something about it made both of us uneasy. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way the person hadn't said anything. But suddenly the entire bay didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt wrong. Tyler suggested we start heading back toward shore. I didn't argue. We turned our kayaks and began paddling toward land. The rowing started again almost immediately. Splash, pause, splash. Still off to our right. Still the exact same distance away, and somehow matching our speed. The longer we paddled, the more uncomfortable I felt. Because even though we couldn't see the boat anymore, we could hear it perfectly. 20 minutes passed like that. Us paddling. The rowing sound following us through the fog. Neither getting closer, neither falling behind. Finally, the fog began thinning slightly. Visibility stretched to maybe 100 yards. I immediately looked toward where the rowing had been coming from. There was nothing there. Just open water. The rowing sound had stopped too. The silence felt heavier than before. Within a few minutes, we could finally see the shoreline. A narrow strip of sand and grass. We paddled straight for it. Neither of us said much. Once we reached the shallows, Tyler jumped out first and dragged his kayak onto the sand. I stepped out a moment later. The cold water soaked through my shoes instantly, but I didn't care. I was just glad to be on land again. For a minute, we both stood there looking back at the bay. The fog was still hanging over the water, but the visibility had improved a lot. There were no boats anywhere. Not fishing boats, not kayaks, nothing. Just empty water. Tyler walked a few steps up the beach. Then he stopped suddenly. Dude, come look at this. I walked over to where he was standing. That's when I saw the footprints, barefoot prints, leading out of the water onto the sand. They were fresh. The sand inside the prints was still wet. Whoever made them had come out of the water recently. The footprints continued up the beach for a few yards, then turned and followed the shoreline. Eventually, they disappeared toward a small patch of trees farther down the coast. Tyler looked back toward the water. You see any boats? He asked. I shook my head. There weren't any. And the footprints definitely hadn't come from us. We were both wearing shoes. For some reason, I started following the prints along the sand. Tyler didn't look thrilled about the idea, but he followed me anyway. The prints continued down the shoreline for maybe 50 yards. Then we saw the boat. It was pulled halfway onto the sand. A small wooden rowboat. Dark wood. 2 oars resting inside it. My stomach dropped instantly. It was the same boat I had seen through the fog. Tyler grabbed my arm. Okay, we're leaving, he said. But I couldn't stop staring at the boat because something about it didn't make sense. There were no other footprints around it, just the single set leading away, which meant whoever had been rowing that boat had gotten out, walked down the shoreline, past where we landed, and disappeared into the trees before we even reached the beach. Tyler pulled me away. We jogged back to our kayaks and pushed them into the water. Neither of us spoke until we were paddling back toward the launch point. Even now, years later, Tyler refuses to talk about that trip. But there's one detail I didn't notice until later that day. When we loaded our kayaks back onto the truck, I looked out at the bay one last time. The fog had completely cleared by then. The entire bay was visible, miles of open water, and there were no boats anywhere, not a single one. Which means the boat we saw, the one that followed us through the fog for almost an hour, somehow reached the shore before we did, even though we had been paddling straight toward land the entire time, and whatever had been rowing it walked past us without us ever seeing it. And that's the end of tonight's stories. But now I want to ask you something. Which story scared you the most? The driver on the foggy highway, the runner lost in the woods, or the rowboat that followed them through the bay? Let me know in the comments. I always read them, and sometimes your experiences are even creepier than the stories in these videos. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more true horror stories like this. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. I post new scary stories every day. Until next time, stay safe and be careful when the fog rolls in.